name is Amy Edelstein, and Joran Oppelt and I are going to do our best to co-present about the brilliant matrix, which we heard quite a bit about yesterday, or actually Friday night from Laura. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with a short meditation. We've all heard so much over the last day and a half. And if we could sit for just a short minute and allow yourself to arrive and let go of everything that you just heard in the last session, all of the interesting things that have filled your mind, things to follow up on, people you've connected with. Let it all go. It'll certainly be there. All the important things will be there. And allow yourself to create some space. We want to become porous on the inside, more malleable, more flexible, so that everything we're about to learn can land on more receptive ground, so we can synthesize and deepen in wisdom and in compassion. For the sake of all beings and for the sake of the cosmos. And we can end the short meditation now. So in this presentation, what we're going to do is Joran and I are going to look at the model of cultural development, the model that Laura laid out, that's been worked, most recently and popularized most recently by Don Beck and Ken Wilber, but many other thinkers have contributed to our understanding of stages and layers of cultural development. It's an incredibly useful tool. It's a very useful tool to understand our own development, to understand how the world works, and to understand how to communicate and connect with people who seem to hold very different beliefs and have very different responses to the same situations that we do. It's valuable in terms of differentiating. At the same time, there are aspects of our understanding and our engagement with that which can inadvertently create division. It can create division within ourselves. It can create division between us and others. So hopefully in this presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to lay out how to work with these stages of development in a way that doesn't fragment and divide and isolate. What our intention to do is to create a greater sense of respect, a greater sense of awe, a greater sense of the mystery of creative development, and a greater sense of not knowing. Maps are very useful. They're incredibly useful tools, and we've seen a number of very sophisticated maps over the course of the weekend, and I've enjoyed learning about some new maps and ways to define and categorize and chart development and intersections and understanding. At the same time, we want to open ourselves more and more to the mystery of spirit, the mystery of evolution, how it all unfolds, our own very small part in this vast unfolding, evolving process. And if we can do both and work in both ways, I think what we'll find is a greater depth of surety, a greater depth of confidence, a greater sense of trust, a greater sense of stability. And if our world needs anything, it needs more heart-centered, mature, and stable individuals who are able to hold complexity, hold mystery, hold not knowing, hold changing perspective in a way that gives confidence to the others around us. That's our intention. Joran and I didn't know each other before being put together a couple of weeks ago to co-present. We've been having a delightful time getting to know each other by phone and now in person. And I hope that that joy of working together will transmit also. And we're going to allow plenty of time for question and answer so that we'll all be able to also get to know each other better through the course of this session.
Thank you, Amy. It's been an honor to be able to prepare with you for this moment. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know there are options today. For the first time ever, you have options. So we are very grateful that you are here in this room with us, sharing this moment. I want to ask everybody a question. Who can tell me what these images are from? Anyone? Game of Thrones. Katie gets it right. Game of Thrones. Does anybody watch Game of Thrones? A few people? Okay. Well, if you're not familiar with Game of Thrones, it is a sprawling and bloody and violent depiction of a kingdom called Westeros, where bloodlines and families are battling over the Iron Throne. It is also a depiction of a fictional territory that is in spiritual transition. They are simultaneously shifting from nature-based religions to mythologically and numerically based polytheisms into this newly emerging and highly contested monotheism, ruled by the one true God, the Lord of Light, that demands blood and fire sacrifice. So, if you want to see what it looks like as religion evolves over time, I highly recommend starting with season 1, episode 1, if you can handle a bunch of beheadings, and digesting Game of Thrones. It's it's a combination Shakespeare and soap opera and spiral dynamics. So integral spirituality, if we're talking about religion having the ability and the potential to evolve, has definitely evolved over time. It has been influenced by the teachings of many, some, a sampling of which are pictured here. It started at the ashram with Sri Aurobindo in the 30s. It moved with Dr. Haridas Chaudhuri to the west, to California, where the Institute of Asian Studies was founded, which then became the Institute of Integral Studies, which churned out the likes of Alan Watts and Michael Murphy and George Leonard. Murphy went on to form the Esalen Institute. Ken Wilber, who repopularized the idea in the late 90s, early 2000s, and here we are today, bringing these maps and models and applying them to not just spirituality, but business and economics and government and design. So the integral spirituality at its core, I think, as evidenced by all those teachers, is all about synthesizing what has long been held by our society as polarities. And Cliff has done a really, really beautiful job of articulating polarities this weekend. I'm really grateful to him for his teachings. A lot of these are East and West, science and spirituality, faith and practice, the individual and the collective, the idea of being a whole and also being a part, the idea of both sitting and grasping. Right? A cognitive dissonance of being able to hold more than one idea at the same time and synthesize those ideas is what integral spirituality is about. It's and like Cliff has mentioned, power being in opposition to love, freedom being in opposition to equality, holding both of those ideas at the same time. It's an emerging spirituality, newly emerging over the last 80 years, I think we've decided, and it's not one of either or, but it is a spirituality of both and, one we so badly need for our time. However, I can speak from personal experience that it's not all rose-colored radical inclusivity. The act of implementing religious pluralism as its own path, as its own practice, is proving difficult. Not only do you need to avoid the accusations of religious syncretism, but you actually have to avoid the actual syncretism that comes with practicing and honoring and acknowledging and including more than one faith. So, integral spirituality does this not by illustrating the commonalities. We're really prone in our day and age to talk about the allegory of the elephant, where the blind men, one is holding the tail and one is holding the ear, but they're all touching and experiencing the same animal, right? Or we talk about us all traveling up the path of the same mountain. We're taking different roads to get there, but we're all headed towards the same destination, right? And these are good analogies, but integral spirituality, I think, succeeds by not comparing gods and goddesses on paper or being too focused on this unity consciousness, but by making clear distinctions between things like states and stages, our cultural history, our creativity, our mythology, human rights and freedoms, communities of practice, lines of development or intelligence, personality and gender types, and so on. We need to be highly aware of the things that make us different at the same time that they make us the same. Back to Amy. Pass the baton.
Great. Joran traced evolutionary spirituality and integral thinking, back, not quite 100 years. I want to also put in a plug for those like Alfred North Whitehead, who started really speaking very in detail about process philosophy in a way that connected us all. And also, as I've been freshly reading the axial religions and traditions about movement and stages and epics, there are many threads that we can trace evolutionary thinking further back. Now, conscious evolution, the term Barbara Marx Hubbard coined, which we always thank her for, and with so much excitement and respect for bringing that term into our vocabulary and our understanding, we aren't rootless. Our understanding of the interconnectedness has much deeper roots than just the last 150 years, 200 years. And while it's important to look at punctuated evolution and stages of development and liftoff that seems asynchronous, we want to also allow ourselves to connect with all the way back, because it gives us depth and dimensionality. It doesn't diminish us by associating us with earlier traditions. It gives us a sense of the very progress that we're speaking about, and of the awe and respect of being part of that process and part of the unfolding progress, and the sense that there will be much unfolding in the future long after we're gone. So I wanted to add a plug for the earlier intimations of this way of looking at a systemic unfolding, both of spirit and of matter. Another thing that I wanted to bring in as we start talking about stages and states and levels and lines is the recognition that morality and heart and compassion and wisdom are something you can't quite map on lines and levels and states and stages. So as we're dividing things up in this way, they are useful tools, but what we're working with is we're working with our whole humanity. And when we're assessing another, a Martin Luther King, a Nelson Mandela, an Aung San Suu Kyi, and we're looking to them for leadership and guidance, we're looking not just at their levels and lines of development, but we are really looking at the character and quality of their own soul. And for ourselves, as we are developing our intellect and our understanding and our systemic thinking and our complexity and our ability to work across disciplines, our ability to look at those 12 sectors of the wheel that Barbara laid out last night, what we're also really looking for in ourselves is the deepening and the dimensionality and the character. I've heard, at times where people who like to work in very sophisticated models have felt some criticism of the Dalai Lama saying, my religion is kindness. And from a certain perspective, I've understood that. But when we look at his moral stature and his ability to work across complexity and to hold tremendous suffering and to wield power, to transfer power peacefully across factions, to break tradition, we're looking at something that's very, very complex. And so when he speaks about that kindness, it really is that depth of vision and heart and compassion that allows you to open up to complexity. So I don't want to pit heart against intellect and cognitive development. I don't want to lay them out as almost diametrically opposed, that you can be a great yogi and develop this sense of heart, or you can be a great integral synthesis and develop this very complex way of working across disciplines. I think for us, our background, our experience, and our lives are much more complicated, so we really want to see those two as deeply interrelated.
The integral theory does talk a lot about maps, a lot about quadrants. It breaks things up into 4 convenient right angles. For people who don't like right angles or corners, it can be uncomfortable. You feel painted into them or cornered into them. And while we need to keep in mind the map, the quadrants that Wilbur has popularized recently, that everything is a whole on, that is a whole on apart simultaneously, and that it is an individual and also part of a collective, and that it also has an interior and has an exterior, and that broken up creates these 4 convenient quadrants. We need to keep in mind, while we're dropping and spackling things into these quadrants, we need to keep in mind that they tetra arise. They arise together simultaneously in every moment. So you can look at the map, you can break it up on graph paper, or you can throw the graph paper away. In addition to the quadrants, one of the major components, and the ones that we'll be using to map the religions today, is spiral dynamics. And we provided handouts on the chairs, but mainly to the front row. So Katie, maybe you can help me. There's a stack over here on the table, and we can make sure that everybody has one of those in their hands. Katie's going to grab them and hand them out. And Laura provided a beautiful and detailed and updated map on Thursday during the opening comments. And while her color scheme began at the warmer colors and proceeded up into the ultraviolet light, this is the original Don Beck version of spiral dynamics that begins with beige and goes up to turquoise and begins to describe an emerging coral that isn't yet documented. So we don't need to spend too much time on describing spiral dynamics. I think from Thursday night we have a real clear, who has an idea, a general idea in place about this spiral dynamics concept, right, and that things move through stages. Okay, so we're pretty clear on that. The one thing to be aware of is that the pendulum, right, the polarity or the swing, does happen from the side here, the warmer colors that are based in self-interest, and then they swing back to the collective, which holds an interest for the group, right? So there is a polarity there, and continuing to increasingly widen to include more perspectives. The next thing we want to talk a little bit about are states of awareness. and just that they are layers of ourself, and what we might call the self or the body. They've typically been taught by the world's faith traditions to be concentric, circles, or sometimes they're called sheaths. Sometimes they're called, in Hinduism, they're called the koshas. They begin with the physical body and then expand or deepen, to include more energy, more matter, more spirit. These can be visualized conveniently enough thanks to Alex Gray and his masterful artwork in these images, beginning with sensory or bodily awareness. That's our waking state. The subtle body moving into extrasensory awareness, our energetic body, psychic energy. It's a dreaming or an altered state. Sometimes it's called chi, sometimes it's called shen, sometimes it's called prana. And then moving into the causal body, which is the formless awareness, holding the consciousness that there is emptiness that cradles and that is also a part of form. Sometimes that's called the soul, or Aurobindo called that the overmind. And then there can be a fourth state of awareness that is the state that is all states, that is non-dual awareness, sometimes called turiya. We may call that spirit or atman or the divine milieu, depending. And the thing to be really aware of is that these intersect. Someone can be at the highest peak state of awareness in a state of bliss, a state of a rapture, and yet themselves be at a blue, traditional, or ethnocentric stage on the spiral. An example might be an enlightened Zen master or teacher who regularly inhabits these higher or broader states of awareness or deeper states of awareness, and that also has a highly developed line of morality and ethics. Somebody who's generous, who's humble, who's kind, yet who still holds on to these strong cultural biases that holds racist or homophobic beliefs. Really important to be aware that states are accessible from all stages. And I think the gateway to transformation is located somewhere at the intersection of the horizontal state and the vertical stage. The intersection of their ability, as Wilber calls it, the ability to wake up and their ability to grow up. And the key to that gate, I think, is found in the hub of the wheel. I think that it's important to notice that we're here today talking about the intersections of psychology and spirituality and government and business and art and the world's wisdom traditions that have been handed down through history. And I think that the intersection of all of those disciplines is the hub that Barbara's illustrating. So it's important for us to be in that hub and locate that intersection for ourselves. And thank God for the internet that is finally pulling some of this wisdom and some of this knowledge together for the first time in history and is presenting it to us in context, right, for those of us who seek it, and for the first time in a sometimes cogent and cohesive way.
That's great. I want to reiterate what Joran was just saying, that you really can access these states from different cultural stages. And also that as you access states from different stages, it doesn't necessarily mean that much about your moral development. Now, I know that's hard to accept, but so far it seems to be more or less true. And what's interesting is that as we were putting this together, I was thinking about two mystics who really embody an unbelievably profound rootedness in silence, in self, in that which is beyond thought. And one of them is Ramana Maharshi, the great sage from southern India. And most of us have seen his photo. We didn't prepare one because I thought about it more recently. There's a beautiful photo with his burning eyes, which was taken by Henri Cartier-Bresson, the famous French photographer, which is partly why it's such a stunning photo. It's also a photo very much towards the end of his life, so he was almost transitioning out of the body. And that photo is so touching that you feel through that you access the depth of his rootedness in that which lies beyond the mind. And now if we pop back to the stages for a second, he would probably be very much sort of what we access in meditation, of that where there is no movement between subject and object. They both spoke from a very similar realization. And Ramana Maharshi, contrary to popular belief, was also very involved in the ashram. He used to get up at 3 in the morning and cook. He was involved in all the building projects. He used to work with the engineers. So he wasn't just a silent teaching sage. But Vimalataka was much more blue to orange, slightly to green. She worked, she had an international awareness. She worked with governments. She worked with structures in culture. So in the sense of orange development, she was very much a modernist in that way, with postmodern sensitivities. But they both come from this depth of silence. And both of them had extraordinary moral development, deeply compassionate. Compassion we usually think of as smaller than it is, just with a lack of self-interest and greed and divisiveness. It's really extraordinary, an extraordinary human attainment, which didn't necessarily have anything to do with their level of development. Now we can know, yes?
In what you're describing, it sounds like level of development. It's almost the role a person plays in the world.
It's a role, but it's also a worldview. It's not just a role, but it's how we understand the world. What's our worldview? Most of us here share, at least cognitively, an evolutionary worldview. We understand the sense of development over time. Our allegiance is towards a greater universal whole. We're taking in more in our awareness. More spans of time, more stages of development, and more depth of perspective. So what happens, or ideally what would happen in an evolutionary worldview, is that it would extend our depth of awe, humility, and compassion across, because we're taking in the unfolding of the whole universe. Now David Christian, who was funded by Bill Gates from Gates' personal foundation, designed something called BigHistory.org, which is an extraordinary teaching tool about the 13.7 billion year universe story. And it's models, which you can use for adult development, but excellent for high school and younger development with video. It's extraordinary. His goal in creating that was not to teach evolutionary science, but was to cultivate a sense of connectedness, an innate sense of connectedness in children across time, so that there would be care for the future and care for the resources of the earth and care for other beings. So that's ideally what happens as you move up in the stages of development. There's greater empathy, greater span, and greater complexity. BigHistory.org. Yes, Barbara.
Are you aware, Amy, of the conflict that has arisen with Dwayne Elgin wanting to go to a big history conference and bring in the concept of the living universe and being rejected, and then trying to demonstrate scientifically that the living universe has reality, and the big history people rejected that. So it has gone on the internet, and I'm a friend of Dwayne's. It's a major issue that has come up, and I don't know how you deal with it, but big history is more reductionist in its view of reality as I understand it.
Thank you very much. I hadn't heard that. Very interesting. So you can see that there are ways to share these worldviews and have very different conclusions about them. You can have a more materialist conclusion. You can have a more spiritually based conclusion. There are a lot of ways to interpret what we're saying. And I think that example, I didn't know about that. I'm curious to look into it. But it does indicate the complexity we're talking about. Yes?
Yeah, now see, the way that came about, because I was in the midst of that, excuse me.
We're going to take a little digression, but that's okay. We'll
Yeah.
get back on track, don't worry.
So the people in big history who rejected that point of view, from the integral point of view, very easy to understand. They're in third quadrant fixation. Anything that's in the first quadrant that's spiritual or in that dimension, they a priori from their academic training reject. It is not real, it is not relevant, it's old-fashioned superstition, we are not interested. Now, where the segue is going to come, it's very interesting that David Sloan Wilson and Barbara just connected this morning about 9:30. It's going to come where the pragmatics of globalization are going to come up with what David Sloan Wilson calls equivalence. That it doesn't matter what type of experience you're having, first quadrant or third quadrant, that when it comes down to where things are
Could you
going.
just define first and third for everyone so that
Oh, okay. So first quadrant is first person experience,
First,
the
right.
deepest subjective understanding that we get in our personal downloads. No need to verify it, no way to verify it, it's all out there. Now science went to quadrant 3, third person reality, objective. Everything's testable, verifiable, predictable, and the value is veracity, what explains the most, right? So if you're caught in that, you a priori don't think that these other things are relevant. But at the moral level of what's driving the planet now at the level of heart for change, there's an equivalence in the morality and the drive that people have for a better world that's going to allow them to make, it's actually the integral jump. I mean, everybody who's done integral talked about it, that these quadrants and experiences have equivalence and they can all be on the table. You don't need to have that direct experience in order to entertain the implications of the 4-quadrant reality.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. So as Kurt was saying, and as Barbara pointed out with that example, what we're looking for is we are really looking to synthesize and not just have deep spiritual experiences, not just access deep states of consciousness, and not just cognitively understand movement up development, but to develop within us a shift in our sense of self-identification, so that our lens on the world is integrated through the exterior, through the interior, without drawing these demarcation lines. So I wanted to introduce Joran's next section, because this is very interesting. What we're both going to do is we're going to use two spiritual examples through the stages of development, which will show you how you can work with this. Joran has a background in Christianity, and he's thought quite a bit about different ways that Christian views express themselves through the stages, and has laid out this explanation and model, and he's going to take us through. And what this will do is give one way of seeing how these stages of development work across a tradition that's a couple thousand years old.
Thank you. Yeah, I am what you might call a recovering Christian. I began my journey in the Christian church when I was very young. My grandmother would take me to a UCC church, United Church of Christ in Medford, Wisconsin. Went to vacation Bible school, was exposed to all the appropriate red and blue teachings of the time. I left the church for a while and then returned once I moved to Florida to a Unity church. That was where my wife was married for her first marriage, and we would go on special occasions. We would go on Father's Day. We would go on Christmas Eve candlelight. We would do the occasional trips to church. So for 5 years, I was a member of that Unity church. I began a path there in the chaplaincy program. I was a prayer chaplain for 2 years with Unity, and continued to serve there. Performing interfaith ceremonies for the solstice and the equinox, and occasionally served as platform leader there. But also began a journey with the Unity Spiritual Education and Seminary program, which I decided to leave, ultimately to form my own integral church, which is 3 years old now, and based in St. Petersburg, Florida. And afterward, if you have any questions, I have some brochures, and I brought my personal copy of our church handbook that we printed for the first time this year at our annual board retreat. And we'll continue to expand and update that publication, and hopefully it will become more widely available. But if you're interested in checking it out, please do so afterward. I was attracted to Unity because it seemed to me to be pluralistic in nature. I was attracted because they were acknowledging and including teachings that were not just from Christ, but from the Buddha and from Hinduism and from Native American spirituality. And people would greet each other in the hallways, namaste, and there would be yoga night and meditation service on Wednesdays. And I was just really attracted to this. I thought, man, this is it, you know, I found my home. But at its core, on paper, Unity Worldwide Ministries is a Christian church. It's a Christian organization, and it is it's committed and dedicated to the practice of not only affirmative prayer and prayer work that's continued at Unity Village in Missouri, but also spreading kind of the metaphysical application of the teachings of Jesus as interpreted by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the founders of Unity in the 1920s. So ultimately, Unity is a Christian church, very different from something like Unitarian Universalism, which they get confused with a lot. The people who are attracted to Unity, they're what you might call green. They are pluralistic in nature. And Unity is able to attract them because they are open and affirming to gays and lesbians and to other religious practices and to other ethnicities and nationalities, and they are open and inclusive. It has a center of gravity at the green or pluralistic level, and it, as any good church does, attracts people who are individually above or below the level that they're operating at. So they are doing the work of pulling in the minds, bodies, and souls of people who are inside that value sphere, that value system. For my example, I want us to consider, real briefly, all the various forms of Christian expression, right? And the institutions, including Gnosticism, Catholicism, the Baptist churches, Methodism, Lutheranism, mainline Protestantism, as well as evangelical Protestantism, Seventh-day Adventism, the contemplative and mystical schools. I want us to consider the Franciscan and Benedictine brotherhoods and orders, all of these expressions, branches that teach literal interpretation of Scripture as well as liberal interpretation of Scripture. Mormonism, metaphysical and spiritualist churches that exist, New Thought churches, which include Unity and religious science and Christian Science, all these forms of Christian expression that have adapted and evolved over the course of time, including Reverend Matthew Fox, whose deep ecumenism is, it's earth-based, and just this new, reclaiming the sacred masculine, an amazing teacher, an amazing writer. Bishop John Shelby Spong, who has also left the traditional church and called for the formation of an ecclesia that would be people called out and called to the teachings of Christ, but outside the restrictions of the church institution. So all of these structures and expressions exist because of their center of gravity, their ability to attract these people. And I want us to consider the possibility that if there were no maladaptation or evolution in any of these structures, there would be no progress. There would be no dissent, there would be no schisms, violent or otherwise, there would be no reformations from within, and there would be no change. So, Christianity and religion as a whole continues to evolve. Every year new branches sprout. And I'd like to take it as an example, apply the concepts of spiral dynamics to my experience in the lineage of Christianity. How we might look at the teachings of Jesus, the symbology of the cross, and the teachings of the school of Christianity, and how we might understand how they can all be interpreted in numerous ways. So skipping beige, obviously, because that's just where people kill each other if you don't agree, or if you have food and one person doesn't. We'll skip beige. We'll jump right to purple, which is the tribal, right, magical value system. This is obviously a pre-Christian structure, right? So most cultures have purple. Christianity didn't exist yet. But if for some reason an individual was inhabiting a purple stage of consciousness and they were inside an expression of Christianity, the cross might look like a cosmic clock, right? Or the four directions, four elements, the four corners of the world. If we were taking it in the instance of the crucifix, where it was used as a tool of torture or death, it would be viewed with superstition. Because at the purple level, the symbol itself has the power, not the individual. The symbol has power over you. Jesus would be viewed as a shaman or a tribal healer. And at the tribal level, we would need to include the Gnostic teachings found at Nag Hammadi, and all the rituals contained therein that include God as the female, that talk about the divine feminine. When I was 3 years old, I was on an airplane. Now, this isn't necessarily a peak experience, because peak experience would be very nature-based and androgynous. They might show up as a tree of life. I was in an airplane at 3 years old, and I was looking out the window, and what I remember was that there were clouds as far as I could see. It was like a field of cotton. I felt that if I stepped out the window, I could literally walk across those clouds. And if an angel had walked towards me, I wouldn't have been shocked at all. And my mother leaned over at the time and said, "What do you see out the window?" And I looked at her in all sincerity and I said, "It's heaven." I mean, I felt I could literally jump out and enter a spiritual realm. It was very real. That to me, because I was in the stage where I also believed in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and fairies. You know, my niece believes that there are fairies that live in the vents of the house, and we've got to, you know, they come out at night. You know, that was the stage I was in. Up to the warrior value system. This is where you get into also a pre-Christian structure, but you do move into monotheism. You move into the God of the Old Testament, the God that is wrathful, paternalistic. It's a God that demands your allegiance and your loyalty to a sigil, to a kingdom, to a family. And a peak experience at Red, it might come in the form of a lord or a king or a ruler that might take the form of God or Jesus. But that Lord would impart to you special commandments, secret wisdom, instructions that you would then in turn take back to the people. Connecting from a place of power, and power imparted to you from God. Moving to the traditional level, this is where we see the majority of Christian expression that there is in the world. It is mainline Catholicism and Protestantism. Jesus is the literal Son of God. Jesus came to this world to save us. The cross could be viewed as a symbol of Jesus' resurrection, the risen Christ, the Savior, ultimately Christ's victory over sin and death. And that's why we wear crosses. We don't wear it, you know, as in we're wearing an Uzi or an electric chair around our neck. We are wearing it as a symbol of hope, a symbol of promise, right?
Yeah.
At Blue, sin is real. There's a need for salvation, and Jesus provided that salvation for us. In John 14:6, no one comes to the Father but through me. That's where we are at Blue. Good versus evil, structure, order, law. Satan is real at Blue. The cross might be seen as an intersection of God's love and God's justice, but that might emerge at later levels too. That might be too loose an interpretation at Blue. The Trinity, very real at Blue. The Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. And a peak experience at Blue would be the pure, undiluted love. The feeling of love that was expressed by God when He gave His only Son to the world. connecting with that love and Jesus' sacrifice, and knowing that he died for you personally. That's a peak experience at Blue. I didn't spend much time at Blue.
Thank God.
Thank God. I left Christianity. Discovered Buddhism, I discovered different faiths. I just got turned off. I was 13, 14 years old and in arguments with my grandmother about Jesus, did he exist? And, all these ethical conflicts within the Bible that we were finding, and she wasn't having it. She wasn't happy with me at that time, and so I left the faith. But for those who are at the modern level within the church, this is and it's the realm of the skeptic, and it is the realm of the scientist, and like Kurt's talking about, the third quadrant. Christians exist here at this level and have very real experiences. It's an ethical approach to Jesus and the Scripture, right? A moral approach to the teachings. Christians at Orange could see the symbol of the cross reframed as the vertical line, the infinite nature, the love of God, crossed by the horizontal line, which is the finite or the limitations of man or the body. You also, as Laura pointed out on Thursday, which I'm glad she did, you also see an increase in greed because of the modernistic structures that are in place. You see the prosperity gospel begin to emerge. And rituals that survive at Orange, I say they have a rational foundation. They might be reinforced by greed or some kind of expectation, but and Laura I think described it best by saying he still goes to church, but now he goes there to network. That expressed it perfectly for me. The downside at Orange and of modernism in general is that mechanistic view of not only biological life but the universe, and the rituals begin to be the same. You see in Catholicism the dispensing of the sacraments, right? The assembly line of salvation that the organized church can provide. It's a mechanistic view and a mechanistic expression. But a peak experience at Orange could be a very intellectual and ethical reality. Visions of a healer and a teacher for the world. Jesus as an idea that contains other ideas, right? That we need to unpack intellectually, ethically. We need to express it. And also the experience of the self as part of this vast and wondrous machine. While I had left the Christian tradition or the Christian faith, I was now reading Bertrand Russell, reading a book that was called Why I'm Not a Christian. I was reading about quantum theory and color and Gödel and Escher and Bach and all of these scientific expressions. Friedrich Capra's Tao of Physics. I was into learning as much as I could. I didn't consider myself a Christian, but one afternoon in the woods, I collapsed and fell to my knees in a peak experience that had me inside this machine, and the machine was a record player. The entire cosmos was a swirling disc that resembled a record, and I was the needle on that record, playing and creating sound within the cosmos that became my life. That is a mechanistic peak experience, if I've ever heard one. So they're real, they can be real. As you move to postmodernism, this is a pretty radical shift from modernism, postmodernism, because you're moving to the self-interest of the group. And this is a major shift because you're able to hold the perspective of another, right, as being valid. So if somebody's interpreting Jesus in a different way, you're able to sit down at the table with them and have a rational conversation and not want to choke them out. Jesus here could be the realization of the divine idea, right? Not only the idea that contains other ideas, but the pure expression of that idea. The sign of the cross could now here at Green signify salvation for all sentient beings. The body of Christ could here be viewed as the people. People expressing Christ in different ways That's the body of Christ at green. In metaphysics, in unity, there's a teaching of the cross being viewed as us crossing out negative thought, right? The denial that needs to happen before the affirmation, the clearing of the hovel before you plant new growth. The cross represents that, removal of negative thought. Peak experiences at green don't necessarily need to look like Jesus. They could be the green man. They could be the gargoyles that we see. They could be Jesus appearing as having masculine and feminine qualities at green. Because those borders are beginning to be removed, those boundaries. Or they're still in place, but as Amy described them, they're becoming porous. They're beginning to pass through. As we move from postmodern to integrative or integral value systems, it's back to self-interest, so we are identifying directly with Jesus, directly identifying with the source, or God, or the Father. We're experiencing this enlightened state, this Christ consciousness, first-hand spirituality, starting with the South, North, West, and East, the via negativa, the via positiva, the via creativa, and the via transformativa. He has completely redrawn the symbology of the cross. And that's possible at these integral levels. Jesus could be viewed as one of the enlightened masters, as tapping into a consciousness greater than himself. If you really want to get into Christianity at this yellow or integral level, I highly recommend the writings of Paul Smith, who literally wrote the book on integral Christianity. And if you want to get into an integral approach to the Trinity and the cross and the life and teachings of Jesus, I highly recommend his work. For me, experience here at the integral levels, it's experiencing compassion for all through identity with the Sacred Heart. And
what does that mean to you?
The Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Compassion for all. How would that be experienced, or how do you?
I think that at the integral level, you're not only able to sit in your confessional or your church and pray and experience the love of God, but you're able to turn it around and transmute it and distribute it through your community in the forms of service and in the forms of building new structures that can house that love. You know, you're developing compassion for all beings, so now you're using knowledge to create vehicles for that love. I think that that's what that would look like, for me anyway. Thunderbird was a peak experience for me at Integral. I was on a beach. I was having an entheogenic experience with mescaline, and I stepped heart first into a huge Thunderbird that was made out of stone and wrapped up around the planet, and his lone eyeball was the moon, and there were stone wings that extended off to his side, and I stood there on the shore for more than an hour, reclaiming a sacred masculine that I had lost from my own father. Stood there for an hour, realizing that this might look like a purple structure. This might look like a Mayan stone bird. But that was the cross for me. That was the Christ consciousness communicating to me in very masculine language about what my next steps were. So, at Integral and beyond, that's what those peak experiences can look like. At turquoise, or the mystical level, we're talking about not only salvation for all beings, but we're talking about salvation for all beings in all worlds. A cosmic consciousness, a planetary awareness, and compassion in all directions, not only inward and outward, but as Charles Fillmore, founder of Unity, wrote, Christward. That's where our compassion travels. Peak experience here could be, as I described, Jesus appearing in recombinant forms, forms that have appeared in every level up to this point, reappearing, synthesized, brand new, re-energized, reborn. And it could also be described as, Teilhard de Chardin described it as the Omega. In very cosmic language, a hypercentration of cosmic matter, the peak created by the convergence of the evolving universe upon itself. Very few institutions or buildings house yellow and turquoise expressions of Christianity. That's why Integral Church meets in a city park. Outdoors, we sit in a circle. There are very few institutions that are codifying and building structures to teach and spread this level of interpretation of Scripture and the teachings of Christ. And that brings us to the top of the spectrum, and I want us to consider the spectrum in applying it to other religions. Consider the Judaic forms, consider the Hasidic forms, the Orthodox forms, the liberal forms, consider the Kabbalah. Consider Islamic forms, the Orthodox and literal forms, much talked about now because of the Islamic State, but consider Salafism, consider moderate Islam, consider Sufism, mystical Islam, consider the whirling dervishes and expressions through ecstatic dance. You can also look at Buddhism through the same lens. You can talk about traditional Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, into the teachings of Shambhala and spiritual materialism. Integral is putting forth now the idea of a fourth turning of Buddhism, that the wheel of Buddhism is now turning again for a fourth time and continuing to evolve. So we can look at any faith tradition through the same lens. Right now, Amy is going to guide us through looking at it, evolutionary spirituality, through the same lens. Amy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a moment because that was quite something. He took us on quite a journey, and you can see that all the stages are alive and well in, someone who was definitely not born 2,000 years ago. So I'm at a crossroads. We have 20 minutes, and I do want to make sure that we have some time to interact. And I also want to take you through some things which I think are going to be instructive and helpful. So we're going to see how it goes, and also if you have questions during, then I'm happy to raise your hand. And my path, my earliest path was in sort of leftist Judaism. I was raised in a congregation that had no rabbi, and we had a woman cantor who was a voice student, and I was very involved and used to lead services. And that was my first experience of cosmic consciousness, was when we were doing some prayers about God as one. I was like, but of course, I had this flash, and I recognized that cosmic consciousness, the unity of all things, was in fact reality. Fast forward, I got introduced to Eastern religions in college. I went to a very good school, but I was only taking classes with professors who I thought were the best in their field. I was really looking for wisdom. And I studied some great things. They didn't really have what I was looking for. So I went to Asia in 1983. I was fortunate to spend the better part of 4 years, mostly in retreat, back and forth between the States and India. I did a 3-month silent retreat. I spent 12 months in the Himalayas. I studied Tibetan language with a monk at the Dalai Lama's monastery and studied with 2 lamas there. I spent time at Shivananda Ashram with the great Swami Chidananda Maharaj and Swami Krishnananda, who are no longer with us. And so I really had, in the space of a few short years, I packed as much in as possible. I was determined. In 1986, while I was still in India, I met an American teacher named Andrew Cohen, who founded the organization Enlightenext. And up until about 3 years ago, I was a very integral part of that whole community. It was a residential community and also a global international community. A lot of what we did, particularly from the late 90s on, was really work with the principles of conscious evolution and an evolutionary worldview, very much inspired by the work of Teilhard de Chardin, Sri Aurobindo, and Ken Wilber, Barbara Marx Hubbard, other people who have talked about an evolutionary worldview. And we were really working it. It was a community of intensive practice. Mostly, I was in the main center, so there were, in the late 90s, there were about 70 residents, about 150 on the weekends. We did several hours of practice in the morning. We all lived and worked together and ate together, and then did 4, 5, 6 hour meetings pretty much 7 days a week, all days on the weekends. It was really an evolutionary cauldron, for better and for worse. So I have all kinds of thoughts and impressions about communities. A number of years ago, I can't remember when it was, maybe 2008 or something, I was at the AGNT conference in California presenting on the evolutionary experiment of Enlightentext, and Barbara was there asking my husband and at that time teaching partner Jeff Carrera and I were co-presenting, and she was asking us lots of questions about how this really worked. And we were really in the process of experiencing extraordinary explosions of collective awareness, collective awakening, of the sense of intelligence beyond the individual, the sense of personal resolution arising out of that experience of collective, we didn't call it collective intelligence, but that really became the movement. We had a magazine called What is Enlightenment, later Enlightentext magazine, and published a beautiful piece on the collective intelligence movement at the time by Craig Hamilton, who of course now is, teaches in his own right. And that was really what we focused on. And so the awakening to evolution, the deep time perspective that Brian Swim so beautifully lays out, is really part of my DNA. A lot of what I've moved to reconsider, probably over the last 5 years and more actively over the last couple years, is I moved to Philadelphia. I now teach in the center city. I do teach evolutionary spirituality. I also work in high schools, teaching mindfulness, cultural development, and brain science to juniors and seniors. And I'm quite committed to, I'll have about 300 students next year. It's part of their school program. These are taught in public schools, the best high schools in the city. And I'm really interested in translating these rarefied experiences and the depth of practice that I was engaged with in ways that can benefit people who are never going to do that. These are hopefully college-bound kids. They're rising out of rough neighborhoods. They want to go somewhere else. There's a lot of depth and experience that they would like as mentorship. They would like to respond to this. And I'm very interested in how this plays out in very different settings in a very different language. So that's partly what's inspired me. I've also been very much inspired to go back to many of the teachers in the blue religions that I was trained by, and to reconsider their offerings and the mystical depth now, and also to support people who live in settings where they don't have the advantage and opportunity of having a close community. So how do you create something that I call an urban congregation? How do you really do that? So these are questions that are on my mind. So I just want to share that so you know that what I'm going to do right now is I want to take you through these levels of development as expressed in evolutionary spirituality. So there are probably, I don't know, a dozen teachers who are actively teaching this kind of collective development, evolutionary development, evolution of consciousness in different ways. They're very good. There are a lot of different processes and practices. And, and there are also pathologies in that movement, like in any movement. If you look at Christianity, we've just had 2,000 years to see those pathologies play out. In this movement, you've had less time, although we've seen some of those pathologies played out. So I'm not really here to address that, but what I want to look at is I want to look at how this leading edge thinking carries with it all these other stages. Because as I said in the introduction, I want us to open up, to become archaeologists of ourselves and archaeologists of our current experience, so that we don't fragment, so that we don't disassociate, so that we don't become, spiritually arrogant. And an evolutionary worldview tends to fill one with so much enthusiasm and excitement that inadvertently it can also lead to less respect and less humility. The blue traditions do a lot to teach respect and humility, and they're very strong in that. So that's part of the process of why I'm doing this. So I hope that that's all clear. And it's a work in progress. So when I was paired with Joran, this is the first time I've thought of this in the stages. So we'll see how it goes. So let's look at red. Now, also, many of you have done any group work. You've probably experienced some of these things, and I certainly have, and I'm certainly guilty of saying many of the things that at all these different stages, and believing them, and calcifying around them in a way that I don't feel is a true expression of a process-oriented perspective. Process is constantly in movement. We're always in movement. We each also have our own experience that comes from our various life trajectories. And so there are a lot of things that aren't so solid in the way that sometimes we can make them. So tribal is definitely alive and well in the whole tradition of evolutionary spirituality. I mean, how many people have done circle discussions and said the magic happened?
And it did.
And how many people have said, oh, the last person got it and the circle closed? How many people have felt like there was some kind of grace that would descend when you got together with those people? So these are real experiences, but we can map them on really a purple level. And it also carries with it its own language and superstition, and also ritual and practice. I personally, and maybe it's my Jewish background, I personally believe that ritual and practice is very important, so I'm not against ritual and practice. But often to prepare for these circles, we chant. It could be a chant of intention. It's not necessarily a Sanskrit chant that you do before your yoga class or a martial arts chant. It's a chant that would prepare you in intention. It would be a chant to remind you to leave your self-centered egoic motivations behind you. Bells can do it. We signal a bell, a moment of silence. Some circles use a talking stick that gets passed beyond, which also is a symbol of weaving, the needle that weaves the thread of the conversation, and that thread is the thread of consciousness itself. We use those things in our leading edge evolutionary spirituality. They're purple. Purple's not just what happened 2,000 years ago. And so then we have red. And red's an interesting one because red is the more battle-oriented one. We often like to think of negative characteristics. But these are the loyalty to the tribe. The peak experience in red is, I've come home. These are my people. I can let go of my frontal self in this experience. It's very profound, it's very powerful. Most people who seek have never experienced that in their church, in their synagogue. They want to. But that sense of I'm with my tribe, we are bonded at a soul level. We will defend each other spiritually. We will keep each other on the path. we protect each other against influences, materialist influences that would draw one away, that would distract one into negative habits. Very red. There's a tribal leader, there's a facilitator, there's a guru, there's the one, I am the one who you must follow and I'm the one that lays down the rules. Now that can be healthy and unhealthy and can be very combination of both. Sorry, Ruth.
No, it just reminded me of what you were describing AA, the 12 step program.
Yeah. AA has a combination of red and blue. Blue, it has a lot of order because it has the 12 steps. So it's really kind of more blue, but people feel very, very bonded with their AA group, their meeting. I have to go to my Thursday night meeting because those are my people. And that's very important part of the process. So there's a real awakening to this because one finds that one has something that can create trust in a person and people that you can feel trust with. So then we come to blue. There's a lot of blue in evolutionary spirituality and all the different groups that I know of and all the different teachers, and I've had the good fortune to meet a lot of those teachers personally and spend time with them and get to know them a little bit. And everyone's trying to create processes and practices, as we talked about last night. How do you replicate? How do you teach? If you're an educator, you need a lesson plan. You know, I don't go to my juniors and seniors without everything mapped out and then a few things on the side, because if it's Friday on Halloween, you're not going to get to teach them anything unless you've got a lot of things in your pocket to pull out. So processes and practices and education all go together. You need to start universalizing. Now it's blue, these processes and practices, the content may be further reaching, but generally what I've seen, they're blue processes and practices. That's fine. It's not, we don't have to demonize these lower stages and tools of development and insist that they're all more evolutionary than they may be. A lot of these processes and practices create ways and codes and paths of development, and the awakening to that is a sense of directionality. I know where I'm going. I know what's next. And it's not a limited, restrictive sense of what's next. It's a sense of knowing that one is able to let go of a certain negative type of uncertainty and give oneself to what's at hand, which is the question of self-purification and evolution. It's a very important awakening and powerful peak experience. So then we have what I feel maps onto the modernist development is the relationship to science and the deep time awakening. I mean, personally, this was my real awakening to evolution. Was Barbara asked me the other day, what was it? And I realized it was a moment where we were researching for an article for what is Enlightenment magazine and watching videos of Brian Swim talk about the universe story. And he was talking about molten lava to rose bushes to giraffes to mother and child. And it's just, and I could picture him there, and it was just like, oh wow, we are really all part of this beautiful unfolding process, and there is nothing separate from it that ever could be separate from it, from the beginning of time through beyond what we can imagine in the future. And that literally changed my view on life. It was something that was a fundamental shift. So the orange awakening that I feel in evolutionary spirituality is awakening to our non-separateness with science. Neuroscience is a part of that. Evolutionary biology is a part of that. Our parallels between human dynamics and physics are all part of that. And again, the peak experience can be radical. It can shift your sense of self dramatically. In the green awakening is really to the social sciences, to psychology, to the sense of how we work, how we interact. We're starting to map cultural development. We're starting to look at building a new world. we're starting to look, oh, we need social structures, we need structures and institutions. This is hard to do because we're both looking at inner development, personal development, our psychologies, our psyches, our histories, our personal, individual karmas. We're looking at how do we get along, we're looking at maps for the future, everyone has their own idea. So this is a really interesting stage. And then yellow, again, we're going back to the more individualized stage of development, and this is what I feel in evolutionary spirituality. You start seeing a sense of individual authorship. You start seeing individuals who have a deep immersion in this view, innovating in all kinds of different sectors, starting to express the integration of their understanding through their own talents, whether it's art or education or architecture or bioscience. And this is, again, it's a stage that's very important to encourage. Now what happens is often there's too much identification at the blue level with the tribe, at the red level with the leader, or at the orange level with the cognitive understanding, to really support each other's individuation. And that is something I really am committed to in my own life, is supporting as many people as possible to really individuate now that they've understood and internalized and begun to practice this, to really express them without trying to hold on to it, and start getting this view out there. And then the last stage, as far as I think about it now, is really, and I've been very influenced by this group called the Speculative Realists and Timothy Morton, and to a lesser extent David Abram, who's also written about this, is a non-anthropomorphic view of evolution. Teilhard wrote before the 50s. He wrote, in the 30s to the 50s. He talked about the evolution of human consciousness as the most important. He's touched me so much. So if you've never worked with his work, please do. But I think now what we're needing to awaken to is a sense that we're not at the center. The earth, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth. Human beings are not at the center. If you're looking for a process, you're looking from all different directions and dimensionalities. And the cosmos is vast. And the knowing of the cosmos is vast. If we want to awaken to a felt sensitivity to the environment, to the currents, to an organic sense of when we've pushed enough, when we need to back off, in a way that a parent disciplines a child. You're so close. You love your child so much that your child becomes the center, that you have this felt sense of what's too much and what's not too much. And I feel very strongly there's just too much hubris that can come into the evolutionary path when we only focus on what happens between us. So it's something I've just begun to think about a lot. I'm probably a nature mystic at heart. Somebody quoted Emerson. I love Emerson, and he's a nature mystic, and the transcendentalists inspire me a lot. And I feel that there's a lot of wisdom in really awakening to a lesser role of humans in the unfolding of the whole cosmos, which doesn't lessen our responsibility, but it's a different position. And that's what I feel like the next stage of development will be awakening to. Yes, Paul?
I wonder where you put what I feel as the incarnation of the impulse of evolution as you. That's my own personal experience of what's happening. That core of the spiral comes through each of us as an impulse to express, to be, to love more, be more, and so on. It's unique in everyone. And what's happened to me by saying yes to the impulse and I feel like we're one now. I don't feel it's telling me to do something or it's God. And so there's an integration of impulse and creativity and love that I wonder where that fits in this.
I feel that that's the foundation of it.
Oh, I see.
So that when once we're talking about evolutionary spirituality, that awakening to the impulse is the very foundation. That's what defines this path. And then it gets expressed in all kinds of different ways.
And the integration of it, so it felt to me like non-dual evolutionary. I don't feel separate from
Yeah.
it. And when you go into the purely cosmic, within the impulse, if this is from Aurobindo, it comes from source. It's source creating.
Yeah.
So you can actually incarnate the eternal, and your body is a synthesis of the whole story, Adam, molecule, self, and so on. And your impulse is that itself, is that evolving. And I think that integration has not been fully expressed yet.
I agree. I agree. And like you said, it's a non-dual, because in the end, you can't really separate source from expression. It actually is truly non-dual.
It's actually bullet point 2. And interesting that Llewellyn von Lee, when he introduced the discussion in Silicon Valley at this conference on technology consciousness in the future, that was actually because he had all of these scientists in the room, all these entrepreneurs, all these artificial intelligence people, which represent all the ways that this is going to emerge. And it's such a cacophony of emergence that without that compass, which is coming, then that is what we have to just know will be able to guide that. Otherwise, the cacophony would just throw it off 1,000 directions.
And just another thing that has meant so much to me through Teilhard de Chardin is that evolution has a direction intrinsic to it, not intrinsic to me personally, but I found that it was the same one I had. So it was very convenient that the idea that evolution always tends towards more consciousness, more freedom, and more complex, synergistic, or loving order, it gives me God in evolution in such a beautiful way when you incarnate it. And when you cultivate it as a way of being in the world, and just to jump to the wheel and the hub, if you really take the hub, as you were saying, if the whole core of the spiral is coming through it incarnate, with not only you alone, but you collectively, to divine the design of what's emergent out of us, because we have no name for the structure of society. You know, it's not any of the old isms.
Right.
But I call it a co-creative society, for lack of a better name. But, oh my God, if you actually put all those wheels into a co-creative modality and see all the brilliance is coming through, and imagine the impulse of creation moving towards the noosphere, getting its collective eyes, a la Teilhard de Chardin,
Right.
I don't see in here this huge expectancy. And somebody said to me a while ago, I worked a lot with the Catholic sisters, and they said, Barbara, you're so Catholic. And I said, well, what is so Catholic about me? They said, expectancy. And a lot of people don't feel that. Immense, deep, profound expectancy, but not like I'm waiting for something to happen out there. It's intrinsic to the process itself. But it gives an animation. And just one last thought here, as you get older, like me, at 85, and you find the impulse in you getting more active, I really believe it affects the body.
Yeah.
It transubstantiates you. If you say yes to this 100%, your cellular life is affected. And I don't even know the full implications of this with extended life and all the other new technologies toward this. But I'm declaring as an elder of the new, the newness. I'm declaring newness.
Thank you.
Whatever that might be.
I think we're,
I'm gonna make you and an announcement, just really quick.
All right, we're going to have a round table, which Barbara is going to lead, and it's obvious this group wants to extend the conversation. So Barbara, maybe when you lead that round table at 3:30, yeah, maybe you guys can continue this conversation then, because they started the meals early on us again, remember. Okay, and I have one now, well, luminary, these are the luminaries on that round table, by the way. It's going to be Ricardo, Ajoa, Glenn Martin, Kurt Johnson is in the room, Charlotte Haynes and Crispy and Cleve with Barbara and Amy.
3:30. So hopefully you all learned something. Hopefully you all are connected with this model. We're going to continue the conversation, not only today, but tomorrow. I'm going to ask that we close, and we all stand and rise, and if we could all, like we're in church, hold hands. Let's all hold hands. We're going to close with an integral dedication, like we do at our integral services down in Florida. Just close your eyes, pretend you're outdoors in a beautiful city park. Just take a deep breath in. Is everybody connected? We need the AV staff connected too. Why don't you come on in? Just touch somebody's shoulder or something. We don't care. Take a deep breath in. In gratitude to Radford University and Lauren and Glenn and Barbara and everybody here this weekend. Thank you. And everyone repeat after me. May my consciousness and my behavior be of benefit to all beings in all worlds. Liberating all into the one taste. Of this and every moment. Amen. And namaste. We'll see you at mealtime when we step out into the day.
Jenny.
Can we have a group photograph? Can we have a group?